What would you do if someone mocked you in front of a crowd? Not for what you said, but for how you look. Imagine walking up to a counter, offering a polite greeting and hearing laughter. Not with you, at you. Imagine being asked if you just learned to speak English on a plane, when English is your first language, when you hold a master's degree, when you've just spent 3 days teaching international leaders. That's exactly what happened to Amina Lawson at a New York airport. And what she did next didn't just silence the room. It sparked a conversation that reached millions and forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's about the power of dignity when the world tries to strip it away. Stay with me, because Amina's response will leave you speechless, and what happened afterward changed more than you could imagine. Amina Lawson wasn't having an extraordinary day. She was having a very ordinary one. The kind where you're just tired, where your feet hurt from 3 days of standing panels and networking events, where you're mentally calculating if you have time to grab decent coffee before your connecting flight home to Maryland. That kind of ordinary. She just landed from Nairobi, a grueling 14-hour journey, after keynoting a leadership conference for African business consultants. Amina, with her master's degree in international business, had spent 72 hours discussing market strategies, ethical leadership, and cross-cultural communication. She presented to rooms full of executives. She'd held her own in debates with economists twice her age. Now she just wanted to get through customs and go home. The New York airport buzzed with its usual chaos. Travelers rushing past. Announcements echoing overhead. The smell of overpriced food and recycled air. Amina joined the line at the check-in counter, rolling her carry-on behind her, already planning her evening. A hot shower, her couch silence. She was professional, polished, her blazer perfectly pressed despite the long flight, her demeanor calm. She'd done this 100 times before. Passport ready. Boarding pass pulled up on her phone. Everything organized, everything routine. Have you ever been judged before someone knew your story? Before they heard your voice or learned your name? Amina was about to experience something that happens more often than it should. Something that would strip away her credentials, her accomplishments, her humanity, and reduce her to an assumption based solely on her appearance. What happened next would change everything. The fluorescent lights at the counter were harsh, institutional, the kind that make everyone look slightly unwell. Amina stepped up to the desk, offering the attendant a polite smile. Professional courtesy. The baseline respect we're supposed to extend to one another. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and warm. That's when she heard it. Laughter. Not a chuckle. Not an amused smile. Full-throated laughter. The woman behind the counter, middle-aged, name-tag reading Patricia, turned to her colleague with this look. This knowing, smug look that said everything before she even opened her mouth. "Oh, she speaks English?" Patricia said, loud enough for nearby travelers to hear, loud enough to ensure humiliation was public. Her co-worker leaned in, grinning like they were sharing the world's funniest inside joke. "You learned that on the plane?" she added, her tone dripping with mockery. The words hit Amina like a slap, not because she didn't understand them, but because she understood them perfectly. She'd heard variations of this her entire life. The surprise when she spoke without an accent, the shock that she could articulate complex ideas, the assumption that her skin color meant her intelligence was questionable, her education incomplete, her very language skills up for debate. This happens more than you think. If you've experienced something like this, you're not alone. The casual racism that lives in airports, offices, restaurants, the prejudice disguised as jokes, the erasure of your entire existence based on a glance. Amina felt it all in that moment. The sting, the anger rising in her chest, the humiliation of being reduced to a stereotype while travelers watched, every degree she'd earned, every conference she'd spoken at, every article she'd published, none of it visible, none of it acknowledged. She had a choice. She could explode, demand a manager, match their disrespect with righteous fury. She could walk away, swallow the hurt like she'd done before, let them think whatever they wanted. She could record herself, blast them online, make them pay immediately. Instead, Amina chose something more powerful. She chose grace. Amina's smile didn't falter. If anything, it sharpened. She looked Patricia directly in the eyes, not with anger, but with something far more devastating: calm certainty. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are when others try to tell you who you should be. "Yes, I speak English," Amina said, her voice steady and measured. A slight pause, just enough weight. "And at times I even teach it." The silence that followed was deafening. You could feel it spread across the counter area, like a shockwave. Patricia's smile froze, then crumbled. Her colleague's eyes widened, suddenly finding the computer screen extremely interesting. The laughter evaporated into something thick and uncomfortable, shame trying to masquerade as confusion. Other travelers who'd been half listening suddenly paid full attention. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed to have witnessed it. Others stared openly, waiting to see what would happen next. One woman near the window had her phone out, recording, capturing every second of the exchange. If you believe respect should be universal, hit that like button right now. Because what Amina did in this moment is a masterclass in dignity. She didn't yell, didn't insult them back, didn't diminish herself or beg for their validation. She simply stated a fact. She spoke English. She taught it. And in doing so, she held up a mirror that showed them exactly who they were, and who they'd assumed she wasn't. Patricia fumbled with the keyboard, suddenly unable to look Amina in the eye. Yes, let me just, your passport, please." The transaction continued in painful silence. Amina maintained her composure, answered questions politely, collected her documents with the same professionalism she'd arrived with. She didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She didn't grant them the relief of her anger, which would have let them paint her as aggressive or difficult. She just existed, unbothered, undiminished. Because here's what Patricia and her colleague didn't know. They weren't talking to some random traveler they could mock and forget. They were talking to Amina Lawson, business consultant, keynote speaker, educator, someone who just spent 3 days teaching leaders how to build inclusive organizations, someone fluent in 3 languages, someone who'd published research on cross-cultural communication. You never know who you're talking to. But more importantly, it shouldn't matter. Respect isn't something people should have to earn by proving their credentials. It's something we owe each other simply because we're human. Amina understood that. Patricia was about to learn it the hard way. The woman by the window, a graduate student named Maria, had seen the entire exchange, and she recorded all of it. Maria posted a video to Twitter that evening with a simple caption: "This is what Black professionals deal with every single day. Watch until the end." Within 2 hours, it had 10,000 views. By morning, 2 million. The internet did what the internet does. It amplified, dissected, shared, and raged. The video spread across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. People tagged the airline, tagged news outlets, tagged anyone who might listen. The comments section became a digital town hall. Black travelers flooded the replies with their own stories. This happened to me in Chicago. LAX, same thing. I was asked if I needed a translator. I have a PhD in linguistics. The thread became a repository of shared pain, a collective exhale of people finally being seen. Service industry workers chimed in, some defensive, others reflective. We need better training. Unconscious bias is real. I've probably done this without realizing. Educators shared it in diversity courses. Corporate trainers bookmarked it for sensitivity workshops. News outlets reached out to Maria for permission to air it. International audiences weighed in, both horrified and unsurprised that this was America in the 21st century. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because silence only protects the comfortable. That's what thousands of people did. They shared it with family members who didn't think racism was still that bad, with employers who needed to see what their employees endured, with friends who claimed colorblindness was enough. The hashtags multiplied. Hashtag respect costs nothing. Hashtag Amina Lawson. Hashtag airport discrimination. Hashtag see black excellence. Amina woke up the next morning to 400 missed calls and her name trending nationally. She hadn't posted the video, hadn't asked for the spotlight, But here she was, at the center of a conversation she'd been having in smaller rooms her whole life, now playing out on the largest stage imaginable. The airline's PR team went into crisis mode. They remained silent initially, hoping it would blow over. It didn't. It intensified. People found Patricia's full name, found the airport location, demanded accountability. "This is your employee," the tweets declared. "This is your culture. What are you going to do about it?" The airline had no choice but to respond. The question was whether their response would match the magnitude of the moment, or whether it would be just another corporate apology designed to make the problem disappear, without actually fixing anything. 3 days after the video went viral, the airline issued a statement. "We deeply regret the incident involving Ms. Amina Lawson. The behavior displayed does not reflect our values or our commitment to treating all passengers with dignity and respect. We have launched a full investigation and will be implementing comprehensive bias training across all customer-facing staff." Corporate speak, carefully worded, legally vetted. But beneath the polished language, real consequences followed. Patricia and her colleague were suspended pending investigation. The airline brought in diversity consultants. They revamped their training protocols. They created reporting mechanisms for discriminatory behavior. Whether it was genuine transformation or damage control, wheels were turning. But the story didn't end with one airline scrambling to save face. Amina received invitations from everywhere. Morning talk shows wanted her perspective. Business conferences invited her to speak about bias in professional spaces. Universities asked her to address their students about microaggressions and resilience. Corporate boardrooms that had never prioritized diversity training suddenly wanted her expertise. She accepted many of them, not because she enjoyed reliving her humiliation, but because she recognized the platform for what it was, an opportunity to turn a painful moment into systemic education. On panels and podcasts, she discussed more than just that day at the airport. She talked about the exhaustion of constantly proving your humanity, the toll of being excellent in spaces that expect you to be mediocre, the choice between anger and grace, and why both are valid. Other airlines took notice. Customer service sectors across industries began examining their own cultures. Educational institutions incorporated her story into case studies on unconscious bias. Training materials featured a video, with Amina's permission and compensation, to demonstrate real-world impact of prejudice. Do you know someone who's had to prove themselves over and over? Drop their name in the comments. They deserve to be seen. This wasn't about punishing two people. Amina said in an interview weeks later, "It's about waking up a system that allows this behavior to flourish. It's about making visible what too many people experience invisibly every day, from humiliation to education, from one airport counter to boardrooms nationwide. But the cost was real. Her privacy gone, her trauma public, her life forever altered by a moment she never asked for." Here's what Amina's story teaches us. Respect costs nothing, yet its absence reveals everything. It reveals who we are when we think no one's watching. It reveals the assumptions we carry about people we've never met. It reveals systems that protect prejudice and individuals who perpetuate it without consequence until someone captures it on video. Amina's grace in that moment wasn't weakness. It was strategic brilliance. She understood something profound. Dignity is a choice, not a reaction. She could have matched their disrespect. Instead, she held up a mirror with a single sentence and let them see themselves clearly. But here's the harder truth. You never know someone's story by looking at them. You don't know their education, their accomplishments, their struggles, or their humanity. And you shouldn't need to know any of that to treat them with basic respect. If you've experienced this, been underestimated, mocked, erased, you're seen. Your experience is valid. Your exhaustion is real. If you've been the bystander, the silent witness, your silence has impact. It either challenges a behavior or condones it. If you've made assumptions about people based on appearance, awareness is the first step. Amina's story is your invitation to examine what you carry. America calls itself a land of free, but we're still learning to see everyone as equally worthy of freedom from judgment, from assumptions, from prejudice disguised as jokes. One moment, one choice, One video, nationwide impact. Subscribe to this channel if you believe everyone deserves to be seen for who they are, not what they look like. Because stories like this don't just inform us, they challenge us to be better. Amina Lawson turned humiliation into education. She chose grace when rage would have been justified. And in doing so, she reminded us that character isn't revealed in how we treat those we respect, but in how we treat those we underestimate. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's the challenge.